Hi, my name is Abby Linville, and this is my Module 1 assignment for EDL 854. I'm going to start off with telling you a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Abby. I live in Shawnee, Kansas. I am originally from Iowa, and I moved here 15 years ago. I am married to my husband, Luke, and we have 11-year-old boy-girl twins. Their names are Reese and Eli. They are currently in 6th grade, and they'll be going to middle school next year, and we just went for their middle school welcome yesterday, so it was really exciting for them to get a chance to be in the middle school. A little scary for me and my husband, but they're excited for that change next year. We have 3 dogs. We have a 16-year-old Yorkie, and then we have 2 other dogs. They are younger. Our golden retriever Sammy is only a year, and then we have a puppy named Susie who is, I believe, 7 months now. I work in Turner, which is a small school district in Kansas City, Kansas. We have 1 middle school, 1 high school, and 4 elementary schools, and a 6th grade academy that just houses our 6th graders as well. I taught 1st grade in Turner for the first 10 years that I was there, and then I transitioned over 5 years ago into the role of an instructional coach. During my first 4 years as an instructional coach, I worked with 2nd and 3rd grade, and then this year I transitioned to a kindergarten and 1st grade coach, so I'm getting a chance to work in the primary grades again this year, and that's been a lot of fun, getting back to my primary roots. So after reading over the 4 resources that were a part of this module, I had 10 key takeaways that I took from those resources. If you look at my first 3, the first 3 have to do with how schools are financed and where all their funding comes from. So school funding primarily comes from the state and local level. At the local level, that's mostly made up of your local property taxes. It's also important to keep in mind that not all states allocate their funds in the same way. These 3 things were important to me because I think it's important to remember that schools are controlled locally by your local school boards primarily, and a lot of decisions and guidelines for how schools are funded do take place at the state level. So as a building leader and an educator, you should really be informed about who are your state legislators, and making sure that you go and vote in people who align with how you also agree that education should be funded. So I think it's important that we understand all those guidelines that are set at that level as well. Number 4 is that principals oversee the budget for their own building. I think that that's a key important thing that you need to know, that as a future building leader, that is going to be a responsibility that you have. My mentor right now, she told me that when she was hired in her first district, they told her, out of anything you do, don't screw up your budget. And she's like, it's super important, but you also get minimal training on how to do that budget. So a course like this is really important for us as future building leaders to really understand what overseeing a budget looks like and how to do that well and efficiently. Number 5 is that principals often lead fundraising efforts. This isn't something that I know a lot about, and knowing that that is something that I will be in charge of and that will be a part of my role is something that I need to learn more about and gain information about what are the guidelines for fundraising in schools, and making sure that I follow all those guidelines when I have a building of my own. Number 6 deals with understanding how the guidelines for what the guidelines are for how the budget can be spent. After talking to my mentor principal, she talked a lot to me about that there are different accounts for different parts of your budget, and that you have to know what things can come from what accounts, and you also have to think about how much you need to put in each of those accounts with your building funds. So understanding those guidelines and how they differ from district to district and making sure that you're fully informed is super important. Just like in classrooms, we have routines and procedures. As a building principal, you'll still need to have some rules and procedures that you have to follow too. And I think it's important that as a building principal that you establish procedures for how you handle the money that you have as your income and how you handle your expenses and how that is managed within your building. So I think having those procedures will ensure that you are making choices that are efficient and that your budget is being met and you're not going over your budget at all. Building principals also need to understand basic bookkeeping and financial literacy. I think knowing how to read an income statement is super important, and also understanding a balance sheet as well. So those were things that I noticed in the resources and things I think are super important as well. Number 9 deals with having a reliable accounting software. I think that a lot of districts have one already in place, so it will be important as a building principal that you know how to work that software and that you understand how to operate it. Even though I know that in my school district, the school secretaries do most of the accounting part of the budgeting. As a building principal, you still have to oversee it and make sure that things are input correctly, so you'll need to know how to operate that as well. So number 10 talks about that most principals do not have full autonomy in how they allocate their resources. That is something I think that I will need to know going into a building principal role, and I need to know, like, what does that look like in the district that I'm working in and what are their guidelines, because I want to make sure that I am aware and I am meeting those guidelines. So I work with 4 building principals. So I'm doing most of my practicum hours with one principal. So when I'm thinking about what principals do and don't do, or what I don't see them doing, I'm thinking about one in particularly. She does carefully plan out the budget for the year. So she sits down at the beginning of the year and thinks about how much money they spent last year and allocates the funds that she has, the district funds and the school funds, into specific accounts. She also works collaboratively with the ASC, which is our district office, to make sure she's meeting all their guidelines that are set and sees what they're going to fund this year, so she makes sure that her budget matches what they are spending. Like, she doesn't, if they're spending a lot of money on one thing, she might not want to spend a lot of money on that this year. And she also works with the PTA to help fund things too. Like when we need a new playground, she talks to them about how they can help with their fundraising, and what funds that she has that could help support and let them work together to get the thing that we need for our students. She also works with the guidelines set by the district. The one thing that I have not seen her do, and it doesn't mean that she doesn't necessarily do it, is I haven't seen her role in the fundraising. Our district has a district fundraiser that every elementary school does, that's set up by the district, and then the PTA has some fundraising, but I don't know specifically what rules or guidelines she has for fundraising that is done by the school. She is also not highly involved in the accounting process. That's done by her school secretary, but they do meet on a regular basis to review the budget and go over it and see what their accounts look like, so she knows if she's within her budget or if she needs to make some adjustments to make sure that she doesn't go over budget throughout the school year. As a future building principal, I have some concerns because I feel like my knowledge of how a school budget works is not great at this time, and I'm hoping to learn more throughout this class. But I want to make sure that I truly understand the guidelines set by the school district that I work in, and that I have full training on that, and that I have a mentor that I can ask about those guidelines, because I want to make sure that I'm doing it correctly. I would never want to overspend or go over budget. I also want to ensure that the funds in my school are being used in the best way possible. I want to make sure that they are being used to meet the mission and vision that I have for my school, and that my school has worked collaboratively to set. So that is a concern I have. And I also know that it's important to communicate your budget with all stakeholders, and thinking about what is the best way to do that in a way that is respectful of everyone, and making sure that it's very transparent for all your stakeholders as well. These are the resources I used for this presentation. Thank you so much for listening.